voters got a major victory in court in Montana, fighting against Republican efforts to suppress the vote. Welcome back to Democracy Docket on YouTube. I'm Marc Elias. Let's get started.
Mark, tell us about this recent voting rights victory in Montana. What was the lawsuit about?
All right, this is a really, really big case in a very important state for 2024. There are close House elections in Montana, and there is the pivotal U.S. Senate race in which Jon Tester is running for re-election, and control of the U.S. Senate hangs in the balance. Against that backdrop, Republicans passed a very, very bizarre law that made it a crime to register to vote in Montana if you are already registered to vote someplace else. Now, this is not a ban on double voting. That's already a crime, right? That's already prohibited by law in Montana. This is literally makes it a crime to register to vote in Montana unless you have already called up your prior state of registration or prior county of registration and canceled your voter registration. Who does that? Paige, you've moved. Have you ever said, okay, I now live someplace, so I'm now, before I register, going to pick up the phone, call my prior place of registration and say, hey, make sure you cancel my voter registration because I don't live here anymore. Of course you've never done that, because nobody does that. But they wanted to make it a crime in Montana because they wanted to dissuade students and transient voters from registering in Montana. They want to impose the fear of criminal sanctions on them. And thank God a lawsuit was brought. My law firm was involved in bringing that lawsuit, and the federal court struck this law down.
What did the other side argue? What was their defense of this law? Why was it needed?
All right, so we got a lot of the usual nonsense. I mean, let's just, we got a lot of the usual nonsense. Well, it could be a problem someday. We don't want double voting. This is prophylactic for that. Right? Like, we got the usual, that part. Then we got the, well, nobody, how do we know that anyone's really chilled by this? Maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe nobody has standing. So those kind of theories fell by the wayside. But one of the most interesting things, Paige, in this argument is if you go back and you look at the transcripts of the oral argument in this case and in a parallel state case, one of the arguments that the lawyer made was, well, there were people from Montana who were at the Capitol on January 6th. And those people are very upset about what happened in 2020. And so we kind of needed to pass some laws, and maybe they don't make any sense, but they will placate the irrational fears that those folks have. And that's just crazy, right? You can't justify laws by the crazy beliefs of people who were involved in going to Washington, D.C. on January 6th. And so that did not prevail. But it's a sign, though, of how the other side is now, creeping in January 6th to somehow be sort of normalizing of politics today, right? So it's Donald Trump, having them sing at his rallies, and then you see these kinds of arguments.
What did the court do about all of this?
The court said, nonsense. You want to pass a law against double voting? You know how to do that because, in fact, Montana has a law against double voting, and that this law does chill the voting rights of people who have literally done nothing wrong. So the court blocked the law from taking effect while the case proceeds through, the court system. So it issued what is referred to as a preliminary injunction, which is what was sought. And now it's up to the Republicans to see whether they want to appeal that for the 2024 election or let that injunction stay in place while this case proceeds, through the normal channels.
So this law was based on conspiracy theories. It was meant to intimidate and scare voters. It doesn't actually do anything. But Mark, isn't this the law Ron McDaniel was hyping up in her now infamous interview?
Yeah, this is one of the great sort of sidelights about this whole case, right? So this case got filed right after Montana passed the law last year. And Ron McDaniel, who, let's be honest, Paige, was having a rough go of it, right? She was fired. Well, first of all, she changed her last name, right? She changed her last name because Donald Trump didn't like her last name. Then she did everything she could to ingratiate herself with Donald Trump. I mean, she really, really, like, whatever crazy thing Donald Trump wanted her to do, she was willing to do, including, frankly, in my view, inflate the number of lawsuits they filed, but that's a story for another day. But then she decides to make like a sort of a hard left turn, so to speak, by becoming a paid contributor at NBC News. And in her inaugural interview, like in her, like, let me sit down with my new colleagues and be interviewed, she continues to lie about voting rights. And she picks this case. She picks this case to say, this is why what we are doing at the RNC makes sense, and look at how terrible the Democrats are and progressive organizations are in challenging this law in Montana. And in the course of doing so, she, of course, mischaracterizes what the law was and what the lawsuit was about. And PolitiFacts, like literally to add insult to injury, she then gets fired. Like, we know what happened. She then gets fired by NBC News. And in the middle of that, PolitiFacts does a fact check and says that her claim about this lawsuit was mostly false. By the way, I'd be curious for PolitiFacts to respond with what the non-false part was. I guess it was in Montana.
It was a lawsuit in Montana. That's what you got right.
But yes, so this was the case that for whatever reason was stuck in her head. So I have to imagine, hey, Republicans, boo.
What kind of impact do you think this victory will have on Montana's elections come November?
So look, you can never tell what the direct impact of any one lawsuit is, but I think it is fair to say that Republicans would not have passed this law. The RNC would not have involved itself in this lawsuit. It wouldn't be like top of mind in Ron McDaniel's brain when she goes on Meet the Press to try to redeem herself. This would not be, you would not have those facts lining up unless they thought that they were suppressing the vote, right? Unless they thought this was going to have an electoral impact. In my view, it will have a significant impact because this law would have had a chilling effect on people's willingness to register to vote. And remember, you have all of these right-wing vigilantes weaponizing these laws in filing voter challenges, in spreading disinformation online, in spreading lies on TikTok, in sending out false mailers, right? So I think that this was a very, very impactful case that really, really may have an impact in what could be a very close Senate election come this November. Thanks for watching. To stay informed on the latest voting rights and democracy news, sign up for our free daily and weekly newsletters on the link above. This video is produced and edited by Ali Rothenberg, Gabrielle Corporal, and Paige Moskowitz, and is a production of Democracy Docket LLC.